about you. Charlie, when we met for the first couple of times, is sort of our shared vision of how finance organizations should be run. You are really putting transparency first as a leader, and use sort of a human and tool-centric approach in the process. So really excited to hear your thoughts and wisdom here on this panel. And then Siqi Chen here is a CEO at Runway, a friend of the company, and is building a next generation tool for FP&A for mid-market companies. Before starting Runway, Siqi has been a serial entrepreneur. He started a company called Sandbox VR that some of you folks may have heard of, and has been a product leader at both
Did not
Post.
start it. I wasn't a founder. I was a CEO
Oh,
for a brief
sorry.
period.
I miss. Anyways, I'm sure a lot of the credit there goes to you. So excited to have you and give that executive perspective on running finance teams from a founder lens. And then Siki is also an angel investor in over 100 companies. So we'll have a good investor lens here too. And yeah, with that, I welcome both of you. Excited to be chatting with you guys. And I want to start with a very broad and first question around maybe with you, Charlie. What do you see the role of the finance organization be in a company?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Excited to talk about finance. Always great to do with a broader set of folks. To me, it starts with very simply what I'd refer to as scorekeeping. Is like, how do you help everybody know where you're at? Just that's the number one role, and no one should be surprised at any point in time. And I see the finance role, the finance team having a really at any scale, a really important role for the company, the executives, the broader stakeholders. How's the company doing? Sounds basic, but it takes real work to do this well. Then really helping around decision making. Like, how do you enable others to make informed decisions? Right? Again, that applies to a lot of people across the company and outside. And how do you help them have the right information to make smart decisions? As you scale, how do you help understand resource allocation? That's a critical role of the head of finance, but frankly, the broader finance team too, and really helping him think through that, especially as companies change, as priorities evolve. How do you make sure resources go in the right places? And that goes back to the first piece, like, do you know what's happening? Can you surface what's actually going on in the company to really reflect on that? And then compliance, risk management. We don't talk a whole lot about that. Growth is the focus for all of us, but I think it's an important role that the finance function plays as well as to keep the company safe. Until you have a broader compliance team, legal teams that can really dig into that, I think there's an important role being played in bringing that lens in how the company evolves. And then most important of all, you are responsible to controlling and managing the cash. Early on, this is the only thing I was worried about. It's like, do we have enough cash? And there were times where we had a lot of questions, and so that is really top of mind. It becomes easier as you get bigger, but that is always really top of mind. Still today, that's one of the first questions I ask my team: is how fast are we growing, and how much money are we making? That is still the two number one questions I ask.
Yeah, that is awesome. Cool, cool, cool. And we'd love to get the same sort of take from you, Siki, especially as you sort of seen company grow and scale from nothing into hopefully a lot, a lot. What are sort of how does that role of the finance team and accounting team change as the company grows?
Yeah. Um, so I think Charlie did a really good job of covering what the role is about. And I'm not sure how much more I can add to that, but maybe just put a different lens to it. I think put in really simple terms, I think there's two things, right? One is what's already happened, right? Are you the keeper of the score? What's already happened? Um, that are you reporting out the right numbers accurately in a timely manner to all the stakeholders around you, right? And so that's sort of the accounting and reporting aspect of it. And over time, particularly over the last like 5, 10 or so years, more of the emphasis on the strategic role of finance is about where you're going and supporting people making good decisions about where you're going. And this is where the planning and analysis parts come, the financial planning part comes in. And so as a company scales, the detail and sophistication and complexity and data volume of doing that well increases. And that really what it drives the change of a finance organization. So when you start a company, you really don't need to do anything, really, right? Because you have no product market fit, no revenue, very few people. All of your money is really just going to revenue, going to payroll. But as things get complicated, you start making money, you get product market fit, you have a sales team, you have different customer segments. Increasingly, the complexity of the data, the volume of the data, the complexity of the business all increases. And that puts a lot more pressure on the accuracy of your model and maintaining it over time so that you can make more decisions and also making all of that understandable to the stakeholders. And so over time, the amount of sophistication and demand on the finance org and the technology stack increases to make sure that the org knows where you're at now and where you should be going.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And you can also, as we sort of hear here, there's a strong evolution basically going on as the company changes. And what I like to always have sort of a litmus test internally for the finance teams I've been a part of or I've run is like, who are you serving? Like, who's your end customer basically in the process and currently? And this may change as it goes along. So maybe in the early days, there's not much process around. It's just like supporting the CEO using Charlie's thing, like let's not run out of cash, number one priority, and grow in the process, obviously. And things as companies scale, this sort of role evolves, and your stakeholders and customers, internal or external with investors, kind of changes. And to that note, I'd be curious to hear sort of your take on that, Charlie, as you've seen really growth from small to big, but then also publicly listed companies. What different type of customers or personas are you catering to as the company scales, and should you cater to as a CFO?
I think you touched on it. In early days, it's really, make sure the basics are in place. So it's not just the numbers, as obviously like that's the number one role, as Siqi emphasized as well. Like that's the foundation for all of us. But it's also thinking about process and kind of helping everybody not to have to worry about how you even collect cash and how you bill people. Like this is like, so your customers are the CEO and internal teams, and as those teams evolve, like you're there to try to remove as much complexity from them. So exactly to Siqi's point, you're focused on selling and building. That's it. I viewed our role in the early days on as much as I can help everybody else be focused on growing and building, then I'm doing my job and not running out of cash. So that the early days feel very much around that. Then the second phase is really what Siqi emphasized, like how do you spend more time on planning, on strategically kind of engaging with the rest of the company? Where are we going? Therefore, what does it mean in terms of resource allocation? Can we afford it? Like what trade-offs do we have to make? And this is all done through planning and really having a good understanding of the levers that drive the company and spending enough time on building models that help you think through that. And then as you continue to scale to growth and exit and all these things, then the external stakeholders, they're never not important, right? Your investors are always an important constituent. And that's an important part of the CFO job as well, is communicating to those investors. That just becomes more and more complex as you get closer to an IPO and even post-IPO. As a public company, like the CFOs I supported in public companies, they spend close to half their time talking to the investment community. That I don't think that's very clear, well understood, is that your role changes pretty dramatically the moment your stock trades, because you need to manage that. And that means you're in front of people. And it's not just talking about what you did, is strategy, again, where are you going, what is driving the business, and kind of helping everybody understand. And so that's a lot of the evolution from the basics, the operations, to strategy and frankly storytelling is where you'd end up spending a lot of time at the later stages.
Yep, awesome. That makes sense. And I'd love to take it maybe from all that sort of public status all the way back to sort of the early days of how do you actually build a team around you? So assuming you're the first finance hire that comes into an organization, maybe Siqi, I can ask you from sort of a CEO perspective, like what do you expect of this sort of first hire to come in, and then what would you recommend? Who do you hire and build it? How do you build a team around that first person?
Yeah, I think that may be a better question for Charlie, but I can speak to sort of like the CEO perspective and also what we've seen with successful finance leaders who are some of our customers. As Charlie knows, and many finance people know, like the pressure is on the CFO to be more strategic all the time, right? And a very valid question is like, what does that even mean? And the lens in which I look at this, and I think the lens through which a modern, successful finance person should look at every dimension of their job is as this bridge. And so where finance teams, I think, go wrong unsuccessfully is when they become siloed, this black box, where it's a finance org, and they have this model that no one sees, and They send out these spreadsheets that you're supposed to fill in and you don't know where it goes. And it basically just reports to the board or the CEO and it's its own little fiefdom. That's not what modern finance is about. And it's very deeply underutilizing what finance professionals do, right? So the tactical way that I, as a CEO, and I think modern finance people who are leaders who are successful at their jobs, are about building a bridge between their jobs and everyone else's jobs. So, for example, if you're creating a model, having a deep understanding of how every department in the company actually works and actually thinks. And by having the model, that level of understanding, it makes your model more accurate. But also more importantly, where you're communicating with these different department heads, including the CEO, you can present information in a way that makes sense to them, that matches their own mental model. And, in my first company, for example, I didn't know the first thing about finance or business or really anything at all. And we had a fractional CFO and a Harvard MBA. And I just remember that sense of disconnection I had with that person because, they came in a couple of days later and they had this model. And I just knew they knew nothing about like what the business was about, how we think about growing, how we're going to make money. And when that happens, you're just, you just have a passive relationship with your head of finance. You're like, okay, I don't even know what is going on. That's not where you want to be. You want to be a key member of the team. You want to be the holder of the model of how the business works, and you need to be successful at communicating that. I think like that is the right lens in terms of thinking about how to increase the strategic impact of a finance leader.
Yeah. And that example, Siqi, we talked about that a couple of days ago, really resonated with me. So for whoever, and I've been very much that person, if you're junior, you know all the numbers, you've cranked your Excel up, everything ties, everything flows nicely, but then you realize you have actually done very little diligence around the business, and you're sort of that analyst that brings up a bunch of numbers that have no connection with sort of the real world. So if you're that person or were that person once, just keep that as a reminder.
Yeah, and I think this goes both ways, right? Like it's not just the modeling bit, but also like, what do you do when you're creating a budget, right? You're sending out an empty spreadsheet template and trying to get information from. Like, how do you make it so that like it's not a chore, right? How do you make it so that like that's something people want to do, that they understand the impact of it? So it's sort of this, it goes both ways, and the strategic role is like connecting the work that you're doing with the work that individual people in different departments are doing, so that people can understand how they all fit in.
That's awesome. Thank you. Cool.
And me plus one, what Siqi said, I think is really important. And talking about models, I think where I've seen people be most successful, exactly to his point, is develop the model together. Right? The way you're going to learn is actually sitting together with your business partner and say, here's my understanding of how your org works. Let's sit together, so then you have a common language, exactly to Siqi's point. Like, so then you know exactly, because even through that process, you'll find, oh, that's how they're thinking about their levers, and that's how their mental model works on, we have like different capacity models, one for the sales team, for the support team, for the implementation team, but they're all different because each leader thinks about it a little differently, and they behave differently based on how the business performs. And now what's great in terms of like, once you have that in place, and you can do this really, really early, it doesn't require anything complicated. Decisions happen so much faster because everybody's working off the same data set and structure, and very quickly like, oh, this is not going well, we need to adjust it. You get to decisions a lot faster, and people feel part of the loop and kind of a lot more exposed to how everyone thinks about it. And then they also have confidence that finance, again, to Siqi's point, is representing this in a way that's consistent with how they think about it. And so you don't have all this loss in translation and people disagreeing on what the data says, which is always an issue when people are not on the same page.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, and then maybe off the back of that, sort of building the team and creating these processes that we just described here. Question for you, Charly, is how do you think about the skill sets that you want on that early finance team?
To me, I think it applies to a lot of roles, but I think you need problem solvers. In the early days, all you're dealing is with fires and problems, right? It's like, so half of the decisions are which fires am I going to work on, and do I enjoy just kind of unpacking problems and solving them? Do I just enjoy doing this? So finding people who have that skill set, proactive, because you can't wait. You can't have people who just wait to be told what to do. You want people who just like love to jump in there, solve problems. That also generally means you need to be curious. Like if you're not curious and want to understand, it's going to be hard. And you need people who just like derive a lot of positive from just understanding, from getting to the truth. And so I'd say analytical to me is like, yeah, table stakes of course, but beyond that, it's really that problem solving, curiosity. Just those two skills, I think, should get you a long way. As long as they have technical understanding of finance concepts and can be analytical, then those two really drive a lot of it, in my opinion, early days.
That's great context. In terms of the so that was focused a lot on sort of like the qualities, which I think is at the end of the day supersedes probably most hiring decisions and rubrics out there. In terms of very tactically, maybe for CFOs or heads of finances who are building their first finance teams, what type of functions or like skill sets from a hard like knowledge perspective would you focus on first? Either of you guys.
I'm happy to start. In the early days, what was successful, I'd probably do again, is just in terms of kind of setting the foundation. Start with a really strong account or somebody with a clear accounting background. Because if the numbers aren't right, a lot of other things are not going to work. And so just getting that foundation right is pretty critical in my mind. And so we did that, and it helped me a ton, not having to worry too much about that aspect. Then quickly pair that person who's with somebody who can start to be operational. And by that, I mean AR, AP, those types of processes. To my earlier point, how do you remove this from the business? Which also helps you control a little bit what's going on, right? So it's not like completely a free for all across the company, but also really helps starting to be thoughtful about process and scalability and all these things. Even early on, those things matter. And then the last piece that I would add is somebody who can think forward. Like to Siqi's point earlier, like a big part of the job is like everything's happening this way. What does this mean for the next quarter, the next year, the next couple of years, maybe? But even like within a year, understanding what's happening and where things are going. So kind of more of an FP&A background. I think many people can do these things. It doesn't have to come from an FP&A background, but that modeler, kind of that curious person who's going to understand the business and can help you understand the path forward. So those would be my first three hires, and that's effectively what we did, and that's worked pretty well.
Awesome. I think there was also a question around that in the chat, specifically on which sort of profile to hire first. One nuance that the question I think was from Ivan had there, Charlie, to double click on you is for that FP&A type of profile, do you have a preference between hiring like ex-private equity, ex-bankers versus people that have done FP&A already in-house at another company?
I will state my bias. I was an investment banker, so I'm obviously biased towards some of that. My first FP&A hire was an investment banker, and it worked pretty well just because they learn fast and do a lot of work in a short amount of time. So I think in a startup environment, it works well. It doesn't have to be that. It worked well with my personality, how we thought about the world. I don't think there's one path. And then we then paired. My team currently is a mix of professional services, the things consultants, bankers, and more classically trained FP&A people, and that works well. The FP&A people are really good at process and engaging with their business partners on here's what we're going to do, here's the quarterly process, here's the information, and really setting those data pipelines and everything so that everybody understands what's happening. And the bankers can work more like, here's this new product. How are we going to think about it? How does that impact our business? And so I think it's slightly different skill sets. The two together, actually, I think are quite powerful.
Yeah, I've just to echo that. I used to work at Zynga, and what was interesting is Zynga had a really unique way of hiring product people, and half the product people used to be investment bankers, because Zynga was actually basically like a quantitative optimization company where like basically we're trying to make numbers go up, and the investment makers were really, really good at creating models. And so I think that's a great hire. So I think that's like one really successful archetype, both for specific types of products and finance people. The other archetype is seen actually, and this is fairly rare, but someone with a technical background who somehow enters finance. And I think the thing that these archetypes have in common is that, for at least like the financial planning part of it, so much of the success is about thinking about things in terms of systems and drivers and having an accurate model. And so if you have a technical background, you're basically building software, right? And a model is literally a software simulation of a business. So having a technical background and having done it in investment banking before are two really, really good archetypes that I think could be undervalued because most people are like, oh, FP&A, okay, we'll hire someone with just a pure accounting background. And that often doesn't get you to the level of operational detail that you want in a model.
Me plus one, the technical point. I think you're absolutely right. It's like, that actually I think is even changing more with everything moving faster and how we're expected to provide information. A lot of the work now is, and I'm lucky to have some more technical people on the team, is around integrating system, how the data is flowing, how do you put in a data warehouse and then query it in a way that makes sense and makes different data sources to get the information you want. That is a critical skill set. And that takes some first interest in doing it, but real technical skills, because yes, it ends up being a mix of a little bit of data science and a willingness to dig into to system building that's really critical for to support finance teams today. I think that's changed quite a bit over the last 5 years and only is accelerating. I don't know how we would do our jobs without more technical people on the team.
That makes sense. There is a lot of questions actually in the chat that I'll start weaving in around this topic, so we'll stay here for a little longer, gents. So one thing that I just wanted to share out, because Brian Wiesberg here, a friend of Rillet's, a lot of wisdom always, also shared the same thing for accounting roles, and I want to just highlight his comment quickly to everybody in terms of hiring for accounting roles specifically. So similar to what Charlie described on banking versus in-house FP&A folks, so that mix also applies for sort of like ex-audit Big Four / and in-house accountants. But I wanted to double click there, maybe Charlie, with your experience around like hiring for accounting roles, anything there you wanted to add to what Brian here in the chat shared?
Yeah, so I mean, actually, for us, the outcome is kind of the same. I have a mix of folks who are ex-auditors and folks who've built more of the functional kind of operations of finance and accounting, and that's worked well. Because of course, over time, you need people who are really thoughtful on how are the financials created, the controls that you start to put in place, so it doesn't become a huge exercise as you scale, and you're really thoughtful through it over time. Because they know, like in the end, an auditor is going to look at it this way. Therefore, we need to be able to represent it in a way that makes sense. But just that is not enough. You need people who also understand the realities of a business, the realities of what it is to selling to a customer, to creating a contract, to billing a customer, to collecting. And to me, it's again the mix. Those diverse backgrounds are really helpful. And then building a team that then learns from one another, because then everybody's getting smarter. And to me, I was lucky enough to find somebody who was an ex-auditor, had operational experience to start the accounting team and build it. Not always easy. And then the team was built by recruiting out of Big Four and folks who had more operational background. And that's worked really well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And then another question here in the chat revolves around RevOps. Whoever wants to take it over you too. Like, what is a good timing to hire RevOps? I know there's a divergent opinions also in the market, so I'm excited to hear your views.
I think it depends on go for it, Siqi.
No, I was saying I'm excited to hear this answer from Charlie.
Oh, I think it actually depends on your business, right? Like how sales driven are you, right? Because like I think the timing of it will be quite dependent on what's driving your business. I think if you're go to market driven and especially sales driven, I think earlier is actually not a bad thing, and being thoughtful about systems also, like what CRM do you have, what information is flowing through, how clean is that data? Because that actually impacts a ton of what you can do in finance. Having really good go-to-market information is pretty critical for forecasting. And so this is where I tend to be on the side of this is a hire you probably want to consider relatively early as you get some scale. I'm not saying it's like early you have product market fit. No, as you have a repeatable motion from a go-to-market standpoint, I think it starts to make sense to then have somebody who's really focused on that and can really thoughtful about capacity planning for sales reps, the ramp periods, the compensation, all the things that you have to figure out that finance needs to understand well. But in many cases, it's not an experience people have gone through. So we did it relatively early. I probably would have done it even earlier than we did, because it has such implications on the quality of data you get to then make more of the decisions around scaling.
Makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, usually it's when you're doing a big raise and you need clean data, that's one trigger. But I think the other thing to think about is like if you have a really good model, like looking at the cost of such a hire and looking at like the revenue that you're like the cash flow that you're losing if you don't have it tight is another like maybe like fine litmus test for how you're doing it, if it kind of pays, this role could pay for itself if you time it right.
100%.
Cool. Awesome. I'll shift gears a little bit here into more just technical things on the evolution basically of the tech stack. So what I always like to do with sort of prospects or customers is like chart out sort of the tech stack. So not even like putting in systems, but just knowing how the information flows. And I'd be curious to either hear your Siqi or Charlie's views on like how do you treat tech stack decisions? How do you sequence things out? Because again, it's a mix between humans and technology, but it's actually a really hard problem to solve as you scale.
I mean, yeah, happy to start. You gotta start with the ERP and kind of was the foundational system for finance. That's how we approached it. I was lucky enough to have people who were smarter than me and kept it simple enough in the early days. We didn't kind of over-engineer it. Like one of my big learnings, one of my big learnings is like I had no idea how much time I would spend talking about systems in this role, and I'm talking about it all the time, and more. So that's number one. If you think you're not going to talk about systems and data, you will. So just be ready. Be ready. That will be your life for many years in finance. And so to your point, Nick, being really thoughtful about how you build it. And for us, it was kind of matching the needs of the business. So it's a lot of like, okay, let's start with the accounting. My first job coming in here was implementing NetSuite. We were on zero. It really didn't work for us from a consolidation standpoint. So we moved to NetSuite. In a way, it was a great experience in terms of having to like unpack the whole business and thinking about how we want to report. So it was just a really healthy exercise. And then from there, thinking, okay, what do we need to connect into NetSuite to do our jobs? And then you go through your AR modules, AP, like what is all the information you want to bring into your accounting system to have accurate data, but also automate and scale. And so that's where again, a lot of thought process was. And then as you scale a bit more, you go beyond that, beyond more of the operational needs, and then start thinking about planning, start to think about procurement, start to think about these other things that also matter. But to me, until you figure out something stable around operationally, feeling good that information is getting pushed into your ERP in a way that your team doesn't have to spend a ton of time on a GL and kind of reconciling journal entries, that's how we kind of scale it over time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think one of the things that may be underrated, I have a fairly eclectic background. Most of my background is in product, right? And I think thinking through things from a product lens is highly useful. And what Charlie said, it was really important, which is like, you want to have a foundation of really solid data, but your choices of technology should be largely determined by the demands of the customers, right? What are the customer problems you're trying to solve internally? And so having accurate data is absolutely the foundation of it. But what is important to the organization? Is it understanding? Is it clarity? Is it a very strong control so people can like collaborate? And from those requirements, then you want to work backwards towards the right set of tooling. And it could be something like a Runway, or it could be something completely different. Maybe you should be on spreadsheets, right? But it's important to understand the requirements and the problems you're trying to solve first, because the temptation by default is, well, we need a general ledger and we need an FP&A platform to model, and we need a visualization thing. And so being really thoughtful and thinking almost like a product person is the way I would approach this.
That makes sense. I read a PRD doc. Cool. So yeah, I would love to sort of shift gears into sort of some more rapid fire questions, but it will be interesting for the audience to hear about, especially sort of how the future of this function will evolve. And if you had a sort of magic crystal ball, like where do you think it'll go? We'll all find out. It's a very exciting time to be alive in finance. We just joked about that before. So yeah, let's start with you, Charlie. Over the next couple of years, how do you think about the role of the finance function evolving, and as well as very tactically for the audience here on the team, what skills should they work on as they grow?
To me, it's going to continue to emphasize the ability to leverage technology to do our jobs. There's no question, right? There are so many tools available. Siqi's point is really important. Like, including adding tools for the sake of adding tools doesn't do anything. So do you really understand what you're trying to solve? The demands that are on the finance team, and the demands that are happening now is like, I need data now. I can't wait 30 days to know how we're doing. And so the real-time nature of the information, oh, you need to do it efficiently. Well, how do you automate a lot of this stuff? And to Siqi's earlier point too, the pressure on all of us is to be more strategic. Well, that means number one, how do you give yourself the time to go do that and spend time on what's happening with the business, the strategic decisions that need to be made, how do you get engaged and help that process? That's difficult if you're trying to figure out how to reconcile journal entries and make sure you've got accurate data. So I think a lot of it will revolve around, well, systems and data. What is the right setup for you? And making sure that you have a clear path to automation, which may mean, in my case, it means I have some engineers working directly on my team to help with some of that process. It's difficult to just do it with standalone systems. You need some real deep technical expertise around integrations, but sometimes around building tools that are just relevant for you. And so that to me, and that means being able to leverage understanding how LLMs and AI could help you. It doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. Again, each use case might be different, but at least assessing regularly how existing technologies can further your needs and continue to remove kind of the day-to-day and reduce risk. A lot of this is scaling and doing it efficiently, but in many ways, the more you automate, the more you reduce risk, because then you can add controls and you can really, the less you rely on humans to reconcile data, the better. And so that's, I think all those aspects for me are just pretty critical and only going up the list in terms of what finance leaders have to worry about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Siqi, curious to get your take.
Yeah, so one analogy I have is look at what happened to other functions historically. So, my background is someone in data. I used to run product at Zynga, an enormously data-driven type of company. And when I started at Zynga, and this is the mode of most data science teams historically, right? So what used to happen? All of the data was in a data warehouse, and you had a data analyst team. And the way I, as a product person, would get my insights is I would write an email to the data science team who had access to all this data under lock and key. They would write a SQL report, a SQL query, create a report, email it back to me hours, days later, and I get this, right? And what happened is new software platforms came out. So things like Amplitude, right? So I was a seed investor in that company, Mixpanel. And all of these products democratize people's access to data. And so what used to be under lock and key, now you work at a company and the baseline expectation is that everyone kind of knows how many users you have and what retention is and conversion rates and all that. That did not used to be the case. And the outcome of that is that people who aren't data scientists, product people, designers, business people, all are more conversant in data. And I think that is what is happening and will continue to happen to finance too, right? And so we are seeing embedded finance partners, right? That's like not a thing that's existed for a really long time. That used to be a silo thing. But that's because we understand now, just like having access to data for the different departments is incredibly impactful so people can understand the business better, make better business decisions. So is true, even more true of the finance part itself, the business part itself, right? So, we want to live in a world, and I think one of the, the utopian outcomes for Runway, and I think a shared vision for, I think, a progressive finance person is that the success of a finance function should be, you can imagine a designer or engineer saying, hey, if we work on X instead of Y, here is the impact on margin and growth 2 years from now, right? These are the conversations that should happen, that if they happen, businesses would run better, but are incapable of happening today unless the finance team is able to be strategic through the right tooling and the right collaboration and culture to create that culture. And I think that is a transformation that's happening now and over the next 5 to 10 years.
Awesome. I want to shift gears to some audience questions with you guys. I think one question revolved around how do you balance the automations of an ERP versus the flexibility of a sort of fast-growing company with we see that firsthand at Rillet as well, with data inputs changing, new pricing models, systems. How do you balance setting up that clean ERP with sort of a fast-moving company? And maybe Charly, you can have a go at that one since you talked about it just now.
it's an ongoing problem. I don't think I've like fully solved it, but the way we've handled it, one way that's worked okay for us is generally we will start manually on newer things, right, and kind of understand. At some point, you can tell there's actually more repeatability to it. Once there's repeatability, then we work on automation. The worst thing to do is try to automate everything from the get-go. I have so many examples of, Charlie, this will be amazing. You need to change all your systems to support this. And then 2 customers sign up. And now you've done all this work and nothing, it really doesn't drive anything for the business because then you've wasted. I mean, opportunity cost is massive in the early days. And so really being thoughtful there is critical. So for us, it's still to this day, let's have a clear process, understand exactly all the steps that need to happen. The other benefit to that is once you've done it for a few months manually, you understand all the things that can go wrong, and you have a much better understanding of what does it mean to automate it. Because that's the other thing I've seen. If you automate too early, then you keep iterating, which is fairly obvious, but like that's pretty painful organizationally as you're trying to work through new initiatives. So for us, that's how we've balanced it, and it's always attention. I can't say that we figured it out perfectly, but it's working okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great insight.
Hey, Nick, I'm wondering, does Rillet solve that trade-off? I actually don't know if it does or doesn't, but
yeah, so the short answer is yes to a good extent. I'll skip the details. Whoever's interested can reach out to our team, but yes, it's a big part of the proposition of if you're building a mid-market ERP system, how do you balance automation and like seamless flows with basically constantly changing business models? And so yeah, they're interesting product ways to solve this.
yeah, so yeah, my answer is similar, and not to plug Runway, but maybe more broadly, like I think what I've noticed about there are new products coming out all the time, but what I've noticed about the new generation platforms versus the incumbent generation is that there's a difference between like assuming that a business is fixed, right? And when you assume the business is fixed, things are easy to automate, you save a lot of time, but what happens is the business changes, and now you don't have the agency, the ability to make those changes in your model yourself. So you go hire an implementation solutions consultant to do it for you. That costs like $100,000. It takes forever. But I think just from a design perspective, the new generation of products in general, between Notion and Figma and Airtable, things like that, through design innovation, you can create products that are both flexible and powerful and automated. And so I think that is a problem that exists, but is mostly solvable, and is one of the strengths of the third generation of finance products that you can look at.
Yeah, amen. Cool. I'm going to shift gears to from a very systems related topic here to one that is actually very personal to some of the friends that I have in industry, and maybe Charlie, you can lead with that because you may have gone through that transition at some point. Is when you make the transition from a first finance hire to eventually a CFO, there is often this awkward conversation that the CEO or board will have you at some point where you get kind of leveled out, where you're like, you've done all this work, thank you very much, but we need someone that has listed XYZ on ABC, a basic exchange. So how should you approach that if you're that person currently in seat, hoping to be a public company CFO eventually? How would you navigate that trade-off? And then if you're a leader having to have this conversation, what would you message, and how do you best prepare for such a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like a lot of, I mean, any role, like what are the expectations, and being very clear from the get-go. Like Henry, our CEO here, like from day one, he had like, here's what I'm expecting. He was actually very clear on, here's what I'm expecting from you, and then that will tell me that you're moving in the right direction. And we constantly came back to that because of course, to our early discussion, it evolves with the business. So it is first clear expectations with him on like, here's what I expect of a CFO, and therefore like that will tell me that you're the right person. And then same thing with the board. I think you have to engage proactively with board members to understand what they're expecting. And by the way, they all expect different things. Which means that you can't just go talk to one or the other. In the early days, generally boards aren't too big, and so I strongly encourage any finance leader to really develop those relationships, to at least also have, what are you expecting from me as the finance leader to provide, what type of insights do you expect from me? And what would be a good outcome as me as a leader of a finance function versus a bad outcome? That will give you good framing on what's expected. And then as you understand that, then finding many folks have done it before. And so there are a lot of folks willing to share their experience. That is just as important as well. Like surrounding yourselves with people who can help you. And by the way, investors are very willing to help you with that, right? As long as you're moving in the right track, many of them will throw people at you to say, hey, this person can help you think through this problem and kind of continue to scale. And so and there's no magic formula, but I think a lot of it is just being honest with yourself and making sure you get clear feedback and input from the folks around you and the folks who will make those decisions to make sure you know where you stand.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I think from a broader career management perspective, I think the thing that served me well is like know what the job is that you want, and then do that job and act as if you have the job. Do the job that you want to have.
That's a
So
great
when I
one.
think about a CFO, right? Like when a CEO leaves, who is the interim CEO usually? It's either the CFO or the COO. So what does that tell you? It tells you that like a CFO is a person who is basically the vice president of the United States, right? Like they are a heartbeats away from the presidency. And so what that means for someone who wants to be a CFO is that you can't think of your job as just finance. One of the things that we believe internally is finance is not about finance at all. It's about everything that happens in a company, right? Everything that happens in a company falls down to the bottom line somewhere. And so I think if I were to hire a CFO or have someone in finance who would become a CFO, I'm looking for someone who can look outside of the finance function and see the entire company almost as a CEO, because that's, I think, what it takes, right? You want to have a mind meld with the CEO so that one day you might go from CFO to the CEO.
And it's a great one. And very much the expectation, I think, from a lot of finance leaders is to understand the business 360 degrees. Those are probably the only two roles in the company that have that visibility, and it's really, really critical.
Amazing. Cool. AI is always of interest. So there's a few questions around AI in the chat floating around, and making it maybe very tactical for either you, Siqi, or Charly. How does your finance team today use AI, and if so, how?
So I'm happy to start. Not really yet. We are as a company broadly around document ingestions and those types of things. So nothing super complicated yet. We're testing it around some modeling tools. So we're like accelerating some Monte Carlo simulations and things like this using AI, but that's not a very difficult use case. And then we're testing a little bit how to use it to access some of the data in our data warehouses. We haven't really scaled anything yet, but it was just experimenting at this point. I view my job as kind of pushing my team to continue to experiment with what's available to see what we could do with it. I don't think we've yet found something that's like, this is going to completely change how we do things. We're looking at kind of, the AR process in collections, and is there something that can be more automated through that? We have a lot of data, and we have a lot of customers, which is good in terms of like, it gives us a lot of data to train any model on. And so that's something we're thinking about, but we've yet to find a use case where we're like, okay, let's invest here to make a difference.
Yeah, cool. Makes sense. Siqi, any groundbreaking insights on your end?
Yeah, so I'm into AI. Like, that's probably like why most people follow me on Twitter. Sam Altman, Jeff Bezos follow me for that exact reason. And I think like the reality is like understanding how AI works is kind of important because you can see what it can do and what it can't do. These LLMs are kind of all very similar to human brains in that we are bad at math. There's a reason why we use spreadsheets, right? We can't do all these calculations in our head. It's good at language and it has a sense of intuition. And so, we do use AI internally, and we use it for very specific reasons. So, we use it for our sales operation process. So we actually was part of the Zapier keynote where we shared how we use Zapier and AI to automate lead qualification. So lead comes, when you go to our website and enter email, like a bunch of things happen automatically. We clear bid it. We know where you're coming from. We have an AI, we ask OpenAI, is this person qualified in our ICP? If so, then we'll draft an email after doing research on your website to see what it does. We put it into drafts and you press send. So that all in-house. As far as finance goes, we have AI features built into Runway, but the way we think about AI and its usage of it in finance is very specific. So the temptation and the way most AI features are built is basically treating the AI system as a separate entity, like another person, right? So you're chatting with another person, or you have a finance agent that's going to go and do things for you. And the capabilities of models today are not quite there for that to be useful. What it is quite good at is making things understandable in human language. And so some of the things that you can do in Runway, for example, is you write a formula, it's very complicated, has like many dependencies down a chain, and you're going to trace through that in Excel. When you open up a row in Runway with a formula, we just tell you in plain English how it's calculated. And it doesn't even look like AI, just text, right? And that's something AI is quite good at making things very understandable. And so right now, I think the right way to think about it is like, how can you use AI tools and tooling to make your work accessible, understandable to the rest of the company, right? And so whether that's like educating them on how like finance works, or explaining how a model works as they're going through it. So, and that's been pretty effective. So, like one of our customers is a company called ConvertKit or kit.com now. And what they did is they gave everyone access to their Runway instance and did a scavenger hunt inside the instance for like, oh, I need you to find out what impacts margin the most. And everyone was successful doing it. So I think like we think about bridging the gap between finance and the rest of the org, and our use of AI and the product it follows that philosophy. So I think that's the most useful way to think about AI today.
Great. Cool. So let's round this out with one very tactical question for the audience, pieces of advice for their career. So what's the best piece of advice that has been imparted to you from one of your finance mentors or colleagues? Maybe we'll start with you, Siqi, and then we'll wrap up with you, Charly.
I feel like I already gave do the job that you want to have. But I think like one thing that I found has served me well is not being afraid to say the thing that nobody wants to say. Like I think the default is when you have a thought or there's something off to stay silent, not say anything. That is a safe thing to do. And I found it useful to speak up. And there's good reasons why people don't want to speak up, right? It's because people might not like it. You might offend someone. And the way I see that playing out is like, if you're in an organization where you have good judgment and you speak up about it and they don't like it, then you're in a bad organization. So if you get fired, great, you get to go to some different organization which might value that. And in a good organization, if you're saying the things that other people aren't saying, that's how you become a leader. Leaders lead. And the way you lead is by saying the things that other people want to say. And so having the courage to say those things is probably the most important thing that worked for me.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll actually say what Siqi just said is very important for finance people. Oftentimes we are expected to be what I call the truth teller. That is what the board expects from finance people. And sometimes you have to be the one speaking up on here's what's so very important. I think super relevant to I think finance professional. I completely agree. Interestingly, like the advice that served me most is actually very similar to Siqi's first point, like do the job you wish you had. And the way it's being framed to me is more like anticipate, meaning just you should always think about two levels above you. And no matter where you are in the organization, my job today is to think about what my CEO is going to think about and what my board is going to think about. Not to say I'm always right, but if I'm just thinking about finance and here are the things I need to worry about, I'm not doing my job. And that's what's helped me throughout is just always trying to be a few steps ahead of what questions will come in there for, oh, like, do I know and understand why the question and then how I would answer it? And so throughout my career, trying to think 2 or 3 levels beyond my role has been really helpful. And I think it applies to business partners too. When you go talk to a CRO, when you go talk to a CTO, what questions are they going to ask? You should come ready and not be reactive, and because that forces you to be curious and understand them, be more empathetic. I think there's a lot of, from that simple advice, I think it drives a lot of healthy behavior.
On that note, I think that's a great one to wrap up on. Thank you very much, everybody, for spending the time today with us. Thank you on behalf of Rillet, Runway, and Charly and his team at Carta. Thank you very much for making time for us, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.